She had everything that people around her dreamed of having: a beautiful office at the top of a tall building, a team that respected her, and a company that was known for its success. People often looked at her and said she was lucky, but luck had nothing to do with it. Everything she had was the result of long nights, missed birthdays, and years of fighting alone against the world. When she first started her business, no one believed in her. Some laughed, some doubted, and some left her when she needed them most. That experience taught her one thing: people leave when things get hard. So she stopped depending on anyone. She promised herself that she would never let her happiness or peace depend on another person again. From that day, she carried her pain quietly and turned it into strength. Her mornings always started before the sun rose. She liked the silence, the feeling of control it gave her. With a cup of black coffee and her laptop open, she would begin her day reviewing reports, signing documents, and answering emails. There was never time for anything else. She thought keeping busy would protect her from the emptiness she sometimes felt when she got home at night. People saw her as strong and confident, and she played that part well. In meetings, her voice was steady, her expressions unreadable. She knew what she wanted and how to get it. But behind that sharp tone and calm face, there was a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. Her phone never rang for anything other than work. There were no calls from friends asking how she was doing, no family dinners waiting for her. She had built her world around work, and it had slowly become her only companion. Some nights, when the city lights flickered outside her window, she would sit quietly, wondering what it would feel like to have someone beside her, someone who wasn't impressed by her success, someone who didn't need her for business, just someone who saw her as a person. But each time that thought came, she brushed it away and reminded herself that needing someone was a weakness she couldn't afford. Her team respected her, but they also feared her. She didn't like mistakes and didn't easily forgive them. She was fair but firm. Many young employees tried to impress her, but she rarely smiled, rarely praised. She believed showing emotions at work blurred the line between leadership and friendship. What they didn't know was that her strictness was not pride, it was protection. She couldn't risk getting attached to anyone who might disappoint her later. There was one moment that changed her life's direction completely. It happened years ago when she trusted the wrong person. A business partner she treated like family had secretly taken money from the company and left her with debts and damage. That betrayal cut deep, not because of the money but because of the trust she lost. From then on, she closed every door that led too close to her heart. People called her the woman who needed no one, and she accepted that title proudly. But deep down, she knew it wasn't true. She didn't need anyone, but she wanted someone. The problem was she didn't know how to let that happen anymore. One late evening, after a long meeting, she stood in front of her office window looking at the rain falling against the glass. The city below looked alive, cars, lights, people rushing home, but she felt nothing but silence. She wondered if this was the price of success. She had achieved everything she ever wanted, yet something was missing, something she couldn't buy or control. Her assistant once asked her, half joking, "Do you ever take a break?" She smiled slightly and said, "Breaks are for people who can afford to stop." The truth was, she didn't know how to stop. The idea of slowing down scared her. She feared that if she stopped working, the loneliness she kept buried would finally catch up to her. Every award she received, every article written about her, brought applause but no peace. She started to realize that people clapped for her achievements, not for her as a person. They admired her power, not her heart, and maybe that was her fault. She had built her life around being untouchable. On weekends, when most people relaxed, she went through files, checked contracts, or planned new strategies. The quietness of her apartment made her uneasy, so she filled it with work. Her walls were decorated with certificates and photographs from conferences, but not a single picture of family or friends. She had disconnected from almost everyone who once mattered. The calls she ignored slowly stopped coming, and her circle grew smaller until it was just her and her work. Sometimes, late at night, she scrolled through her old messages. There were texts from friends she hadn't replied to, invitations she had turned down, and memories she had buried. She often told herself it was for the best, that people were distractions. But in those quiet moments when her chest felt heavy and her eyes burned from tiredness, she wished someone would message her just to ask if she had eaten. There were times when her reflection in the mirror didn't look familiar anymore. She saw tired eyes and a face that had learned to hide pain too well. She missed laughter, the real kind, not the polite one she gave in meetings. She missed listening to someone else's voice at the end of a long day. One evening, she attended a charity event her company sponsored. She didn't like such gatherings, but her team insisted it was good for the company's image. The room was filled with people who smiled too much and talked too loud. She stood quietly in the corner, holding a glass of water, nodding politely to whoever spoke to her. That night, she realized how disconnected she felt from the world she had worked so hard to enter. Everyone around her wanted to be seen, wanted to impress, but no one really wanted to connect. It made her wonder, had she become just like them? When she returned home that night, she sat on her couch and let the silence fill the room. She thought about her journey, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the people she lost along the way. She wasn't sure if it had been worth it. She had climbed so high, but the view from the top felt lonely. As days went by, small things started to bother her. The way her office felt too big, the way her apartment felt too quiet. She noticed how disconnected she was from everything around her. Her employees talked about their families, their children, their plans, and she listened but couldn't relate. She didn't even remember the last time someone hugged her or told her they were proud of her, not for her success, but just for being her. Deep down, she longed for something she couldn't name. She wanted peace, but not the kind that comes from money or achievement. The kind that comes from love, from being seen, from being understood. But each time that thought grew stronger, she silenced it by working harder. The world saw her as a role model, a symbol of strength. But inside, she was tired. Tired of pretending she was fine. Tired of hiding her loneliness behind meetings and deadlines. She often wished someone could see through her. Someone who wouldn't be scared of her walls. Someone who could remind her that she was human before she was a CEO. She didn't know that life was slowly leading her toward that someone. A person who would walk into her life unexpectedly and change everything she thought she knew about herself. Someone who would show her that love doesn't weaken. It heals. But for now, she was still alone, unaware that her carefully built walls were about to meet the one person strong enough to break through them. The next few weeks passed like any other. Her life moved in the same rhythm, meetings, calls, emails, and late nights spent staring at reports. But one morning, something unusual happened. Her assistant informed her that a small partner firm wanted to meet in person about a project proposal. Normally, she would have sent one of her managers, but for some reason she decided to attend herself. Maybe she was just tired of the same faces. Maybe she needed a change, even if it was small. The meeting was scheduled in a small office downtown. It wasn't one of those fancy places she was used to. The building was old. The walls carried stories of years gone by, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper. When she entered, people looked up with surprise. Not many expected the CEO herself to show up. She was led into a modest meeting room with plain furniture. The man she was supposed to meet was already there, going through some notes. When he looked up and greeted her, there was something different about him. Calm eyes, a quiet smile, and a way of speaking that didn't carry the usual rush of wanting to impress. He wasn't intimidated by her presence, nor was he overly polite. He spoke simply, directly, and with a kind of confidence that didn't need to shout. That caught her attention. Most people who met her either tried too hard to please her or stayed nervous through the entire conversation. But he didn't seem to care about her title. He treated her like any other person. The meeting went smoothly, but what stood out to her wasn't the business discussion. It was how natural everything felt. For once, she didn't have to control the conversation. There was a strange sense of ease in his company, and though she tried to brush it off as nothing, her thoughts kept drifting back to that meeting even after she left. A few days later, she received an email from him about the proposal. It was short, clear, and free of the usual corporate tone. At the end, he added a small line. "I appreciated the way you listen. Not many people at your level still do." She read that line more than once. It was simple, but it felt genuine. She didn't reply immediately. She wasn't used to people speaking to her so honestly. Over the years, she had built an image, strong, confident, unreachable. And people treated her exactly that way, but he didn't seem to care about the image at all. That made her curious. The next time they met, it was for a follow-up discussion. She told herself it was just business, but she noticed how she took extra care in choosing her outfit, something she hadn't done in a long time. When she arrived, he greeted her with the same calmness as before. During the conversation, he joked lightly about something, and without realizing it, she laughed. A real laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in years. It startled her. For a moment, she saw a side of herself she had forgotten existed. As their meetings continued, their conversations began to move beyond work. They talked about books, about the city, about life, and how fast it moved. He told her how he preferred slow mornings and quiet evenings. She admitted she didn't remember the last time she had a slow morning. He smiled and said softly, "Then maybe you should have one sometime." She didn't know why those words stayed with her. Maybe because they sounded like something she needed but never allowed herself to have. One afternoon, when a sudden rainstorm hit the city, she got stuck in traffic near his office. Without thinking much, she called him to ask if she could wait there until the roads cleared. He said yes, sounding surprised but warm. She entered the small office again, dripping slightly from the rain. He offered her a towel and a cup of tea instead of coffee. It was different, comforting in a way she hadn't expected. They sat across from each other, watching the rain through the window. There was silence, but it didn't feel heavy. For the first time in years, she felt present. Not as a CEO, not as a leader, just as a person sitting with another person. It was strange but peaceful. She caught herself thinking how rare it was to be around someone who didn't want anything from her. No favors, no influence, no approval. Just company. That evening, something inside her shifted, though she didn't want to admit it. She started noticing small things she hadn't cared about before. How his eyes softened when he listened. How he never interrupted. How his words carried meaning without effort. She couldn't remember the last time someone made her feel seen without trying to impress her. Over the next few weeks, they met a few more times for work, but their talks kept drifting into personal stories. He told her about his childhood, his dreams, his fears. In return, she found herself sharing things she never talked about. How she built her company from scratch, how she lost friends along the way, how trust had become something she avoided. He didn't judge. He just listened, really listened, and that was something she hadn't experienced in years. Still, she fought the growing closeness. She reminded herself that she didn't have time for distractions. She had worked too hard to build her walls, and she wasn't about to let someone climb over them so easily. Yet every time she tried to distance herself, something happened that drew her back. A short text from him, a random call, or a simple question like, "Have you eaten today?" It was such a small thing, but it meant more than she wanted to admit. No one asked her that anymore. Her assistant noticed a change too. She smiled more, looked less tense, and occasionally left the office early. Something unheard of before. When asked about it, she simply said she needed fresh air. But she knew the truth. She was beginning to crave conversations that had nothing to do with business, moments that didn't need to be productive. There was a warmth in her chest that felt both new and familiar. She didn't know where it was leading, but she couldn't deny it felt right. One evening, after another long meeting, he walked her to her car. The air was cool, and the city lights reflected softly on the wet road. They stood there for a moment, neither wanting to end the conversation. He looked at her and said quietly, "You don't always have to be strong, you know." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had heard people say similar things before, but never like this. His tone wasn't pity, it was understanding. It was as if he saw through her armor and spoke directly to the person underneath. That night, she couldn't sleep. His words echoed in her mind. She had spent so many years proving she didn't need anyone that she forgot what it felt like to be cared for. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the thought of letting him in, or the thought of losing what they were starting to build. As days turned into weeks, their connection deepened naturally. He didn't chase her and she didn't run, but there was a quiet pull between them that neither could ignore. When she talked to him, time seemed to slow down. For once, she didn't feel like she had to be perfect. Her life began to change in small ways. She took a day off just to rest, something she hadn't done in years. She started reading again, cooking simple meals, even taking walks in the evening. It wasn't about romance yet. It was about rediscovering parts of herself she had buried under work and ambition. He had become the calm she didn't know she was missing. And though she still told herself it was nothing serious, her heart knew differently. She had begun to look forward to their talks, to his quiet humor, to the way he made her feel human again. But she also knew how fragile it all was. Her fear of losing control was still there, hiding beneath every smile. She wasn't ready to trust completely, not yet. But for the first time in a long time, she wanted to try. And that desire, that small but powerful feeling, was the beginning of everything that was about to change. Days turned into weeks, and her life began to feel different in ways she couldn't fully explain. Work still filled most of her time, but something inside her had softened. Her mornings didn't start with the same heaviness anymore. The constant pressure that once sat on her shoulders felt lighter, and she didn't always know why. Maybe it was the calm she felt when she spoke to him, or the way his words lingered in her mind long after they parted. She told herself it was just friendship, but she knew it was more than that. There was a quiet connection between them that she couldn't put into words. He made her laugh without trying, and he listened to her as if every word she said mattered. It wasn't something she was used to. People usually listened to her out of respect or fear, not genuine interest. But he was different. Still, a part of her refused to accept what was happening. She had spent years building her walls, and she wasn't ready to see them fall apart so easily. Every time she started to feel close, she found a reason to pull away. Sometimes she ignored his calls. Sometimes she canceled plans at the last minute. She told herself she was busy, but deep down she knew it was fear. Fear of depending on someone again. He noticed her distance, but he didn't complain. Instead, he gave her space. He didn't chase her, yet somehow he never really left. And that confused her even more. One Friday evening, she was in her office long after everyone had left. The sky outside was dark and rain tapped against the glass windows. She was staring at her computer screen, but her mind wasn't on work. Her thoughts kept drifting to him, to his quiet smile, his calm voice, the way he made her feel seen without saying much. She picked up her phone, hesitated, and then put it back down. She didn't know what she wanted to say. She had never been good at talking about her feelings. But before she could think more, her phone buzzed. It was a message from him. "Still working?" It said. A small smile formed on her lips. She replied, "Always." A minute later, another message appeared. "You should stop for today. Go home." "You sound tired." She stared at the screen for a while. No one had told her to rest in years. People only expected her to work harder. She didn't reply, but she shut down her laptop and left. That night, she couldn't sleep. Something about his simple message kept her awake. She realized how long it had been since someone cared enough to tell her to take care of herself. The next day, she decided to meet him for coffee. It wasn't planned, and she didn't know why she wanted to see him. She just did. When she arrived at the cafe, he was already there, sitting by the window with a book in hand. When he saw her, his eyes lit up, and for a moment she felt warmth spread through her chest. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. There was no tension, no pressure to be perfect. She could just be herself, the version she had almost forgotten existed. He made her realize how long it had been since she truly relaxed. But as their closeness grew, so did her fear. One evening, when he gently asked her why she worked so much, she snapped. "Because it's what I'm good at," she said sharply. "Because if I stop, everything I built could fall apart." He looked at her for a long time before speaking. "Or maybe you're just afraid of what will happen if you slow down. Maybe you'll have to feel what you've been running from." His words struck something deep inside her. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because he was right. She had built her life on motion, always moving, always achieving. Because staying still meant facing herself. That night, she went home and cried quietly. Something she hadn't done in years. It wasn't because of sadness, but because she realized how much of her life she had missed. She had been surrounded by people but connected to no one. She had power but no peace. Success but no joy. As she wiped her tears, she remembered his calm face and the softness in his tone. She didn't know what to do with those feelings. She wanted to keep him close, but every time she felt that warmth, a part of her wanted to run. A few days later, trouble hit her company. A false rumor spread online about one of her projects, claiming it was linked to fraud. Within hours, the story caught attention, and clients began to panic. It was one of her worst nightmares, seeing her reputation questioned after all the years of sacrifice. She worked non-stop trying to control the damage. Meetings, calls, statements, and she did everything she could. But inside she was breaking. The stress, the sleepless nights, the fear of losing everything she had built. It was all too much. One night, after a long and bitter day, she sat alone in her office. Everyone else had gone home. The city outside was quiet, but her mind was loud. She felt a strange emptiness in her chest, like a hole she couldn't fill. And then her phone rang. It was him. She didn't want to answer at first, but something in her made her pick up. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She didn't answer right away. For a few seconds, she just listened to his voice. It was steady, calm, exactly what she needed. Then her voice broke. "No, I'm not." That was the first time she had ever said those words to anyone. He didn't rush to give advice. He didn't tell her to stay strong. He just listened. Sometimes silence can do more healing than words, and that night, his silence felt like comfort. Later, when she finally left the office, he was waiting outside. She was surprised to see him standing there under the streetlight with an umbrella. He didn't say much. He just walked beside her as she made her way to her car. It wasn't grand gestures or big promises, just quiet presence. And somehow that meant more to her than anything else. Over the next few days, he stayed close, helping where he could, checking on her, reminding her to eat, to rest, to breathe. She didn't ask for it, but he did it anyway. It was as if he saw the part of her that no one else noticed, the tired woman behind the powerful image. Slowly, her company began to recover. The false rumors faded and her team stood by her. She felt grateful, but what touched her most was his steady support through it all. He didn't care about her title or her success. He just cared about her. One evening, as they sat quietly on a park bench after another long day, she turned to him and said, "Why are you doing all this?" "You don't owe me anything," he smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm not doing it because I owe you. Maybe I just don't want you to keep fighting alone." Those words broke something inside her. The last piece of the wall she had been holding up. For the first time, she didn't try to hide her emotions. She looked at him, eyes wet, and whispered, "I don't know how to let people in." He replied gently, "You don't have to know how. You just start by letting one person stay." In that moment, something changed in her. The woman who thought she didn't need anyone realized that maybe strength wasn't about standing alone. Maybe it was about trusting someone enough to stand beside you. That night, when she got home, she sat quietly in her living room. The city lights glowed softly outside her window. For years, that view had been a reminder of her isolation, but now it felt different. She thought of him, of his kindness, his patience, his quiet way of showing care, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel so heavy. She didn't know what the future held or where this connection would lead. But she knew one thing for sure. She didn't want to go back to being the person who needed no one. Because in him, she had found something real. Not perfection, not escape, but peace. And maybe, just maybe, that was what she had been searching for all along. She had never been good at letting people in. For years, she had built walls around her heart, convinced that vulnerability meant weakness. But now with him, she felt a strange sense of safety she hadn't experienced before. Slowly, almost without realizing it, she began to lower her guard. It started with small things. She shared stories from her childhood, memories she had kept tucked away for decades. She talked about her parents, about the first time she had to take care of herself, about the nights she cried quietly because the world seemed too big and too lonely. He listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging, and somehow, hearing her own words out loud, spoken without fear, felt like healing. He didn't offer solutions or advice unless she asked. He didn't try to fix her life or tell her what she should do. He simply sat beside her, a steady presence, reminding her that she wasn't alone. For someone who had been used to standing on her own, this felt revolutionary. One evening, she invited him over to her apartment. She had spent years avoiding people in her personal space, afraid that getting close would make her vulnerable. But she felt ready, or at least close to it. As he entered, she noticed how his calm energy filled the room. He didn't glance at the awards on her wall or the sleek furniture. Instead, he smiled at her as if all that mattered was her. They sat in her living room, sipping tea and talking quietly. She found herself laughing easily, something that had been rare in her life. He shared little stories about his own struggles, moments of doubt, times he had failed and learned. She realized that he too had experienced challenges, yet he carried no bitterness. That simplicity, that honesty made her feel safe enough to open her heart. For the first time in years, She admitted to someone that she was afraid of losing control, afraid of being hurt, afraid of needing someone and being left alone. His response wasn't criticism or impatience. He only said, "It's okay to be afraid. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Those words stayed with her. She repeated them in her mind during the nights she couldn't sleep. She thought about how long she had avoided feeling, how long she had protected herself from connection, and how much she had missed out on because of fear. Her days began to change subtly. She still worked hard, but she no longer felt the crushing pressure she once did. She allowed herself to take breaks, to walk through the park, to cook simple meals, to read books without thinking about productivity. Life had started to feel richer, warmer, more alive. Her friends noticed the change too. She was softer, more approachable, more present in conversations. People who had once felt she was untouchable began to see her as a person, someone capable of joy and laughter, not just ambition and authority. Even her work improved. She began delegating more, trusting her team with responsibilities she had always kept to herself. It was difficult at first. Old habits die hard. She found herself checking emails late at night, second-guessing decisions and trying to control outcomes. But when she faltered, he was there, gently reminding her that she didn't have to carry everything alone. Their relationship continued to grow, not through grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but through small, consistent acts of care and attention. He would send a message just to ask if she had eaten, or bring a book she mentioned wanting to read, or share a quiet moment with her when the city around them seemed too loud. Each of these moments chipped away at her walls, leaving her open to connection in ways she hadn't thought possible. One rainy afternoon, she was at her office reviewing reports when she realized how tired she felt, not physically but emotionally. She had spent decades holding herself together, fighting battles alone, and it had taken a toll. She looked out the window and thought of him, not in a romantic sense, but as someone who had shown her that she didn't have to face life alone. She decided to leave early. She walked to his office and found him there, working quietly at his desk. When he saw her, his expression softened and he stood up. Without words, he offered his jacket as it had started raining outside. She accepted, feeling a warmth spread through her that had little to do with the rain. They walked side by side, talking about ordinary things. Nothing monumental, nothing strategic. Just conversation, quiet and comforting. For the first time, she realized that happiness could exist in simple moments, in small connections, in shared silences. Over time, she started sharing even more about herself, her fears, her dreams, her regrets. She told him about her mistakes, the friendships she had lost, the sacrifices she had made for success. And he never turned away. He never judged. He simply listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes offering gentle encouragement, always reminding her that she didn't have to face life alone. One evening, after a particularly long day, she confided in him about the nights she had spent alone, the ones when the city lights seemed to mock her solitude. She spoke about her fears of being vulnerable, of depending on someone and of losing control. He took her hand in his and said softly, "You're allowed to feel all of that. You're allowed to be human. You don't have to hide anymore." The words penetrated deeper than she expected. They weren't empty promises or flattering remarks. They were simple truths, and they carried a weight she had never experienced before. For the first time, she understood that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and it was strength. It was courage to show oneself fully, to risk being hurt, to risk being loved. From that day, she made small changes in her life. She allowed herself to leave work early without guilt. She spent evenings reading or walking in the park. She began reconnecting with friends she had neglected, apologizing for her absence and making time for them. She realized that life was richer when shared, and that happiness wasn't something she could earn alone. It was something she allowed herself to experience. Her team noticed the difference too. She was more approachable, more understanding, and more willing to listen. Her decisions became more collaborative, and her company began to thrive in ways it hadn't before. It was as if opening herself up to human connection had unlocked a new level of creativity and clarity. He remained a constant presence, never demanding, never overwhelming, always supportive. They shared quiet dinners, walks in the evening, and long talks about life, work, and dreams. Each shared moment strengthened her trust in him and in herself. One night, as they watched the city lights from her balcony, she realized how far she had come. The woman who once believed she needed no one had learned to accept help, to trust, and to feel. She had discovered that life wasn't just about success or achievement. It was about connection, love, and presence. She thought about her past, the years spent alone, the walls she had built, and she felt a gentle sorrow, not regret, but understanding. Every mistake, every lonely night, every fear had led her to this moment. And now she could finally let herself feel fully alive. She turned to him, her voice soft. "I never thought I could feel this way again. I thought I was too broken, too strong for anyone to reach me." He smiled, taking her hand. "You were never broken. You were just protecting yourself, and now you're learning to live fully." In that moment, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She didn't have all the answers, and life still had its challenges. But for the first time, she knew she wasn't facing them alone. She had found someone who could walk beside her, not to fix her, but to share the journey. The woman who once believed strength meant standing alone had discovered a new kind of strength, the courage to trust, to feel, and to love. She had opened her heart, and in doing so had found a life richer and more meaningful than any achievement could ever provide. She realized that love didn't make her weak. It made her whole. Time moved differently now. She noticed it in the quiet moments, the small details, the way her days began to feel lighter. Life still had challenges, but she no longer faced them alone. She had discovered something she hadn't thought possible, that being strong didn't mean standing by herself all the time. Strength could be shared, and it could feel gentle and warm instead of heavy and cold. Her mornings were no longer just about work. She took time for herself, sometimes walking slowly along the streets, sometimes sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city wake up. He sometimes joined her, but often he let her have these moments alone, respecting her space while still being near. She had learned the beauty of balance, of being independent yet connected. At work, she noticed a change in herself too. Delegating responsibilities became easier. She trusted her team more, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She began mentoring younger employees, sharing her experiences not with pride but with honesty. She told them about failures, loneliness, fear, and how she had learned to keep going. And in those stories, she realized she was no longer the isolated woman she had once been. Her relationship with him deepened naturally. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was about consistency, presence, and understanding. He showed up without demanding attention, offered support without expecting it in return, and gave care without strings attached. She had never known this kind of companionship. It was new, yet somehow familiar, as if her heart had been waiting for it all along. One evening, as they walked through the quiet streets after dinner, she spoke about her past. "I thought I needed no one," she said softly, "but I was wrong. I only thought I could survive alone. I never imagined how much I had been missing." He looked at her with steady eyes. "You didn't miss out on life. You just didn't know how to live fully yet. You were learning, and now you are." She realized how true his words were. For years, she had focused on control, on achievement, on perfection. She had thought that being untouchable meant being strong, but she now understood that strength wasn't the absence of vulnerability. It was the courage to face it, to accept it, and to share it with someone who truly cared. Life outside work also became more meaningful. She started reconnecting with friends she had lost touch with. She called family members more often, visiting them when she could. She laughed at stories she had once ignored, listened to conversations she had once skipped, and allowed herself to experience joy in ways she hadn't thought possible. He never pushed her, never forced her to change, but his presence reminded her that she didn't have to face life alone. One weekend, she suggested they take a short trip together, something simple, to a quiet town near the coast. It was a small gesture, but it marked a turning point. She realized that sharing life's little adventures brought a kind of happiness that no work achievement ever could. They spent their days walking along the beach, talking about dreams and fears, watching sunsets that made the world seem softer, warmer, and full of possibilities. During those days, she reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the lonely nights, the endless work hours, the walls she had built to protect herself. And now she felt lighter, freer, and more open to life. She understood that love and connection weren't weaknesses. They were life's greatest strengths. Back in the city, life continued with its usual rhythm, but she carried herself differently. She faced work challenges with calmness, knowing she had someone who supported her. She handled criticism with patience, understanding that mistakes didn't define her. She celebrated successes, but more importantly, she celebrated small moments, a quiet smile, a shared conversation, a moment of laughter with him or with friends. He had become her safe place, her companion, her missing half she hadn't known she was searching for. Yet she also recognized that this relationship wasn't about dependency. It was about partnership, trust, and mutual respect. She had learned to let someone in, but she hadn't lost herself in the process. She had found a balance between independence and connection, a balance she hadn't known existed before. One day, as she walked into her office, she noticed how much lighter she felt. The same office that had once felt like a cage now felt like a space where she could breathe, work, and lead without fear. Her team sensed the difference too. They approached her with ideas not just for work, but for collaboration. The atmosphere was warmer, more open. She realized that by opening her own heart, she had also created space for others to thrive. At home, evenings were no longer just quiet moments of solitude. They became times of laughter, shared meals, and conversations that mattered. She discovered the joy of doing ordinary things with someone who cared. Folding laundry, cooking dinner, or watching a simple movie became moments of connection, moments she cherished. She thought often about how life had changed her perspective. Success was no longer the only measure of a life well lived. Happiness wasn't a title, a number, or an achievement. It was in connection, in kindness, in love freely given and received. She realized she had been missing half of life all along, not because she was incomplete, but because she had closed herself off to the fullness of human experience. One evening, as they sat together on her balcony, watching the city lights glow softly, she reflected on her journey. She remembered the CEO who had believed she needed no one, the woman who had built walls to protect herself from pain and loneliness, and she realized that every struggle, every lonely night, every fear had led her to this moment. Every hardship had prepared her heart to recognize something real when it appeared. She turned to him, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "I never thought I could feel this peace. I never thought I could trust someone like this again. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that being with you makes it feel possible." He held her hand, his eyes reflecting the same quiet understanding he had always shown. "You don't have to know the future," he said softly. "You just have to live it together step by step." And so she did. Together they faced the days ahead, not as two halves trying to complete each other, but as two complete people choosing to walk side by side. She had found her missing half not because she was broken, but because she had learned to open her heart. Her life continued to be busy. Work challenges arose, deadlines loomed, and responsibilities never disappeared. But she faced each day differently now. She faced them with someone she trusted, someone who cared, and someone who reminded her that life was meant to be shared. She could still be strong and independent, but she no longer equated strength with isolation. She discovered the beauty of ordinary moments, sharing a meal, taking a quiet walk, hearing about his day, talking about dreams, laughing at simple jokes. Those moments became the foundation of her new life, a life that was richer, warmer, and more meaningful than anything success alone could provide. Over time, she also became more compassionate with herself. She forgave the years she had spent alone, the nights of fear and the walls she had built. She understood that those walls had protected her when she needed them, and that letting them down now was a sign of courage, not weakness. Her heart was no longer heavy with loneliness. It was filled with connection, understanding, and love, and she realized that finding her missing half didn't mean losing herself. It meant discovering the parts of herself that had been waiting all along to be seen, loved, and understood. She had finally learned what it meant to live fully, to laugh without hesitation, to cry without fear, to trust without doubt, and to love without reservation. Life was not perfect, but it was real, and for the first time in years, she felt completely alive. The CEO who once thought she needed no one had found her missing half, not in the sense of needing someone to complete her, but in discovering that connection could make her life whole. She had learned that strength and vulnerability could coexist, that independence and love could exist together, and that happiness was found not in achievements alone, but in shared moments, trust, and understanding. As she looked at him, sitting quietly beside her, she felt gratitude, not just for him, but for the journey, the struggles, the loneliness, the lessons, and the growth. Everything had led her here to this moment of peace, joy, and love. And she knew that no matter what challenges awaited, she would face them with courage, heart, and someone by her side. Her life had changed not because of success or power, but because of love, and a love that was patient, understanding, and steady. She had found the missing half she never knew she was searching for, and in finding it, she had found herself.